In this video, we're going to be going over how to create your first agent and going through the agent creation process. So giving it a name, setting instructions, a greeting, choosing the right voice, and then testing it and creating a demo link that you can share with your teammates, your coworkers, your partners, or your clients. So the first thing that we're going to do is go over to this Agents tab. This is where we can manage and see all of our agents. And in this scenario, we don't have any yet. So we're going to either hit the Create Agent button here if you don't have any agents, or a New Agent button here, which basically takes you to the same place. So let's go ahead and create New Agent. The first thing that it's going to ask you is, how would you like to start? Okay, so we're going to need to pick a template, or we are going to start from scratch. Let's just take a look at the templates to see what's in here. So you can filter by industry if you want to find something closest to your industry. Or we can just look at all industries and kind of see how they're laid out, okay, and what current voices are selected. So you can walk through these, view some of the details of the agent, you know, peeking at some of the instructions that are assigned to the agent. This is a good starting point, a good foundation for you to work off of. However, they're not meant to be just plug and play, because every business is different. Every use case is different. So, but what we're going to do is we're just going to start from scratch, because I think that's where you're going to get the most information and the best mental model of, you know, how to actually create an agent. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create on the start from scratch. And then once we've clicked that, we're going to go ahead and hit continue. So the first thing it's going to ask us here is a name. Okay. So here, I'm just going to go ahead and type in something like James. Great. Now, keep in mind that the name is really just something that helps the agent identify what it's supposed to refer to itself as. And it's also something for you to, use for your own accounting. So if you've got multiple agents, it's nice to know which ones are which by simple labels like a name. So we'll go ahead and hit continue once we've set our name. And now let's go over what a greeting is, okay? A greeting only applies in one scenario only, okay? When we're setting the setting, it applies to one scenario. This is for inbound calls. So when somebody calls your agent, what does the agent say when the phone picks up, okay? The difference here in, greetings, where a lot of people get confused, is this is what you need to type in the box for all the, first greetings. The problem is with outbound calls, like if you were to pick up your phone and call someone, you know why you're calling them. You're not just calling them for no reason, right? You have a reason in your mind of why you're calling them. However, with that being said, since you know the reason, when they pick up and say hello, right, you're going to go ahead and lean into that reason. And most of the time, you're going to greet them by name, hey, James, or you're going to say, is this James? Or you're going to say something that's custom to that caller. This is a fixed message that is said anytime someone calls in. So if your phone rings, okay, especially from a number you don't know, if you work at a business, then you don't just say hello. Most of the time, most people don't just say hello, okay? They'll say something like, hey, this is Slavi with AgentVoice. How can I help you today? Or whatever that, department or section, role typically says. Hey, this is, Jennifer with ABC Real Estate Company. How can I help you? Or who do I have the pleasure of speaking with? The reason that is because you don't know when your phone rings why that person's calling you. So you can't really customize this initial greeting. So to summarize, this is what the agent needs to say when someone calls the agent. Okay, so as we can see in this little example, thanks for calling your company name. My name's James, an intelligent AI assistant. Who am I speaking with today? Right? So that's the gist there. But it's not going to say this when it calls someone. Okay, so keep that in the back of your mind. It's not going to say this. This is something that it says when someone's trying to, get information or is reaching out in the first place, not being reached out to. All right. Now that we have that out of the way, we do have some templates, some greeting styles that you can select to kind of kick this off, because it can be kind of difficult at times figuring out what the best thing to say is. And we've got a few different layouts already pre-made. So if we look at how this is laid out, there's some sort of gratitude for calling. stating the company that, or, person that's being called, and then stating who's speaking. And this N intelligent AI assistant note is important because in most scenarios, you do need to disclose that the agent you're speaking with an AI. Okay, so in most scenarios, that is important to do, as otherwise these systems can be interpreted as they're speaking with a real person, and regulations don't really like that. So it's nice to just drop something in there saying like, this is an intelligent AI assistant. The reason this verbiage is presented as a kind of a suggestion is because a lot of people think AI agents are IVR systems, when in reality, they are not IVR systems. An IVR is basically when you call a company and it basically gives you a menu option of press 1 to go here, press 2 to go here, or, like in a few words, tell me why you're calling. And then it tries to use prediction on why you're calling and send you the right department or help you in that sense. So that's not what these systems are whatsoever. These are much more intelligent systems that can understand natural language and have a full conversation with you. So that is why we like to emphasize intelligent. However, sometimes this still doesn't cover everything, cover most people's understanding. So they'll hear intelligent and think it's just some improved IVR, but in reality, it's still not an IVR, and that doesn't bring the point across. So anyways, let's look at some of these here. Let's go ahead and select conversational. Hey, thanks for calling, your company name. I'm James, and an AI assistant here to chat and help out. What should I call you? You could say that, right? You could say something different as well. So let's select, efficient and clear. Hello, your company name here. I'm James, your AI assistant. To better assist you today, may I please have your name? Great. So let's customize this a bit. Just for the sakes of this demo, I'll just use AgentVoice. Hello, AgentVoice here, right? And to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of this, so we'll just say, thanks for calling. And I don't really like hello. It's too high. And now I'm James, your AI assistant. What I like saying is virtual. Okay, I do like that verbiage better. It comes off a little smoother. To better assist you today, may I please have your name? That sounds great. We'll go with it for now. We can optimize that later. So looking at this instructions tab, this can be a little daunting at first. Okay, but in reality, it's really simple. And it's set up to help your agent succeed in the best way possible. So if we look at the 3 different tabs here, there's a core instructions. Okay, you might ask, what are core instructions? Core instructions are, you're giving information to the agent, instructions to the agent that really are its personality, it's who it is, that will never change. And if you notice, the other 2 options are inbound or outbound. The instructions given to the agent on these 2 different types could or should or probably would be different because it needs to handle these 2 different scenarios differently. So for example, an inbound coming call, you'll have a script or a flow for that you want the agent to walk through. However, if it's dialing someone out, that's a different story. We don't want it to follow inbound instructions for an outbound call, So the 2 sometimes have an overlap depending on the use case, but they are different. So we split them up so that you can clearly tell the agent how to handle when people call in and what it needs to do when it's calling out. The core instructions, however, to take us back here, doesn't change based off of whether it's calling in or out. So in this section, we want to tell it what its role is, right? That never changes. If you think about an employee at a company, right? That's just who they are, what they do at that company, what their position is, what they can and cannot help with, what their behavior should be like. So let's just start pretty simple, right? Say your name is James. Reiterate that. And you work for AgentVoice as so what I like to do in the first message of the very first beginning part of the instructions in core, I like to define its role. Okay. After that, this doesn't have to be, too big. There's not a whole lot that we need to do, but there's a lot of wiggle room. So we've got a lot of instructions we can place in here. So after the role here, I like to give it some kind of information, some objections, right? And we're not going to go completely too deep into this, but some information on why some people might be calling, or maybe I'll give it some background on the company itself, right? So we'll just say AgentVoice is a, tool that people use to make outbound call, to say this, keep it simple. Let's do this. Okay, now it knows what AgentVoice is. Otherwise, it wouldn't have any idea. Unless your company is very well known and, the previous models have been trained on that information, but it's still good to reinforce this in the core instructions. So AgentVoice is a tool that people use to take and make calls using AI voice agents. Great. So in some of these things, we might also go over, our biggest, say something like our most important touch points, right? So now it kind of has a little bit of this baked in. So we'll say 1, our per minute pricing never changes. It's always 10 cents per minute. That's great. 2, great. Now we have this established. All right, this is just some information on the company. I like putting that in the core instructions because it's important to know whether it's calling someone or someone's calling it. It's always good to know about that, right? And what a lot of people might do after this, and what I would advise that you not do, is start to tell the agent things like you should behave, or you should have a warm tone, and so something that people will like to do is they'll start honing in on the behavioral instructions. And what's really interesting is a lot of this will actually just come from its role. Okay. These systems know how to behave pretty well off the bat, just by telling it what it is, what it's doing. Spending a lot of time on the behavior, and the persona, sometimes it backfires. Okay. The systems already kind of know how to handle their specific roles really well. So adding stuff like this is not good. It's just not good. I don't like doing that. What I like doing is talking about the conversation style itself. So, when speaking to the customer, we'll say something like this. I think faster than I type. Perfect. Okay. So here's what we have now, right? So we've got a role. We've got some context on but the business or the company that it works for. Okay. And we can expand on this later, right? But this is just the gist. Our most important touch points. Here's a little bit more context on the business, just to give people a little bit of understanding. So if this was an inbound agent, to help answer questions, then, this is still important to know. Because it helps the agent understand context on the value, right? And that's what I would focus on heavily with your agent as well, is giving it some context on the value that your business provides, even if it's not really in a sales role. In the support world, these things can overlap, and it also is just context that the agent needs on the platform to begin with. So that's helpful nonetheless, but it's not necessarily required. I just like including it because, for example, our per minute pricing never changes. It's always 10 cents per minute. Yeah, that might be kind of a sales point, but what's interesting is if questions come up about, pricing, if questions come up about, strange or not understood charges, then this helps provide context on that as well. Here as well, if someone's struggling building an agent or using an agent or not understanding things, this is technically a touch point of a sales touch point, but this is also important context for the agent to know, right? If someone's trying to build something that is completely off the wall, that isn't really built for our platform, this helps. So it kind of acts as both. And then third here, our agents possess capabilities like calling, texting, emailing, and full pre, during, and post-call workflows that make the agents truly valuable. So same thing, if this is just context, it helps overall. Even though it kind of looks like a salesy touch point, it's just providing context on the platform itself. So these systems don't know anything about your business unless you tell them. Cool. So now that we have that out of the way, what we have is some conversational instructions. Okay, so this I like to insert because it applies really whatever direction, whether they're calling or receiving a call. So whether the agent's calling or receiving a call, this still applies in my opinion. I've seen this be very successful. I don't like it when the agents ask more than one question at a time, and agents do have a tendency to want to do that. You either ask a question or answer a question. So what you'll notice a lot of the times is somebody will ask a question, and then what the agent will do is it will give them a response, but then it likes to follow up with a question to kind of keep things going. And that's great in theory, but in reality, that's not what most people do. If you listen to any conversation, a lot of the times it's not meant to just keep the user engaged. It's meant to help the person or just to provide value. Okay. It's not to just keep them engaged and chit chat. That's, if you listen to any real support, conversation, that's what that's like. In a sales role, that might be a little different. You might want to have follow-up questions that help guide someone through a conversation and control that conversation, but that's not what we're building here. This is just a simple agent that might be able to help people, with questions about AgentVoice. So now that we've established some sort of baseline here, this is great, right? One thing that is really important that a lot of people miss, and this is where most people get confused. But with voice agents, what you have to understand is an email like this can be problematic. And I'll explain why, okay? In any voice agent, there's these three different steps that take place, okay? When I speak to the agent, a system transcribes your voice and produces what it thinks you said. Okay, so someone says, I need help with my agent right now. That gets transcribed from audio to text. Then what happens? There's a language model underneath that this gets sent to, right? This same message from the language model or from the transcriber gets sent to the language model underneath. Okay, and so it sees this input and it looks at all the instructions and it produces some form of output. Right. Okay, so that's what the agent would say. However, the agent can say this, but what we're missing here is for the person to actually hear it. Okay, so the agent responds, but now we need something to say it. Okay, that's where the audio model or the voice actually comes in. So what's really important is these audio models that are trained to speak what the agent says are all done differently in different ways. So what's really important here is we need to make sure that we provide instructions on how to say these things. Otherwise, what the audio models might end up doing is saying something like this. So even though I know my name is pronounced Slavi, okay, what's really interesting is the audio model, when it tries to say that, might make it sound like slavey. Okay, that's just the beautiful nature of having a different name, but this happens frequently, right? So what you'll also get then is this @ symbol. Most people don't say Slavi @. Most people just say Slavi at AgentVoice. So, but what some systems might do is if they see this symbol, they won't say @, they'll say @ sometimes. So you won't really get that smooth conversational experience. So what'll end up happening if someone says, hey, my email is, this@thiscompany.com, then what it might get back is, okay, it'll literally say this because it heard it, but then what the audio model says is different. Okay, that's just how they were trained. And that's technically correct. Okay, speaking symbols can be difficult. So in reality, what we want to add here is some instructions on how to speak emails. So how to speak emails. Great. So what we'll do is when you get an email address, you need to speak the email out in NATO phonetic. Okay. So what's interesting here, I can't really spell that. What's interesting here is we're going to get things like this, etc., etc. Right? So it's instead of the agent saying slave at @agentvoice.com, we'll get S as in Sam, L as in Lima, etc., etc. And we can do things like, if there are, easy to say addresses, then you don't need to speak it out. However, what's really important here is when it comes to email addresses, it's not just speaking it, but transcription. So anytime you're requesting an email, it's always great to say things like, hey, could you give me your email address and spell it out letter by letter, please? Having the agent say that in its script is really valuable, okay? Because then what you're going to get is a transcriber picks up on that email address way, way better than somebody just saying Slavi@agentvoice.com, right? If someone just says that, which happens more than you would like, then you're going to get a weird transcription. Then the agent's going to say something funky back to confirm, and then you end up in this weird cycle. Instructing the person on the other end to speak slowly and say it letter by letter. So, you can script that out however you want. But if you can get them to say it letter by letter, they don't even have to say S as in Sam. I just like doing that because it provides a smooth pace. The person on the other line can hear it letter by letter, understand exactly what letter they said. Because if someone says E, right, that might sound like C or B or D or Z. And phone systems compress audio, which makes it even harder to actually hear what the other persons are saying. So I'm sure you've run into that at some point. You might understand where that's coming from, but now you kind of, have a little bit of understanding of that. So that's what these core instructions are for. Okay, to summarize, the core instructions are here for you to tell the agent how it needs to actually behave. And so we'll just kind of take a step back, and we're not going to go too deep into inbound and outbound. Okay. And these are going to be specific prompting videos that we'll have, but it's important to kind of understand what their roles are. And you can leave these blank for now. It's just important that you spend a little time on these core instructions to define the role and the persona, and then we can continue. All right. And we can go back and fine tune that a little bit further. So now what's important is selecting the right voice for your agent. So if I select this, one important thing to note is when you're listening to voice previews, it doesn't always reflect what the actual voice is going to sound like when you're speaking to it. So, I would advise if something sounds interesting or maybe it's not as good as you would like, give it a shot anyways and see what it sounds like. Because in a real conversation, you might like the voice way better than what you would have thought you would have liked it just from the preview. Okay. And so now for, selecting the right language here, we're just going to stick with English for now for this demonstration. We can go back and select a voice that would work best. And so I think Lucas in this case, like I said, the preview sounds different than what it does in the conversation, but Lucas is the most natural and has a really good pace for what I think this use case is. Great. That sounds great. So now what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and hit continue. And we can look at our template, or we can review our agent, view what templates we used. In this case, we built it from scratch. Any basic information that we attached. Here's the name, the first message, the core instructions, the voice, and the provider. So we'll go ahead and create our agent, and we're good to go. So now James is set up. So what we can do now is click into James's profile, which I'm just doing by clicking this little tab right here. It brings us to this page here with a bunch of different settings, and don't get too scared here, but all these settings are really neat and you might need to use them at some point. But for most of the time, to kick things off simply, we can just go ahead and start testing our agent off the bat. So let's go ahead and test it. What we can do is once we're in the profile, we can click this little tester agent button, and there's an inbound test and an outbound test. So from that point on, our agent looks good. So if I wanted to share that with my team members, what we can do is go into this little demo pages site here, and we can hit create a demo page. So what's cool about this is you can basically create a little page that's shareable with really anyone, and you can assign a total minutes budget. So how many minutes do you want to allocate to this total demo experience. So that way, it can't be used for hours and hours and hours, just as much as it's needed, right? And then how many maximum calls do you want to set, and when does the demo expire, right? So you just don't want to have it living forever. So yeah, we'll do James demo. And then this all looks good. You can upload a logo if you want to customize it to your business. And we can select an expiration date. Let's do tomorrow. And then we can hit create demo page. Now, as you can see, we can copy this link. It'll take us to app.agentvoice.com and we can demo it. Or we can do a more white labeled approach where it's just going to take us to a domain that you can share with a client or really anybody at that point. So if you're just trying to get your team to experience this without having to log in and do all that just by clicking a link, you can create a little shareable demo link right here. You just hit copy and give it to whoever you would like, and they can simply click a button to talk to the agent, test it out. So that's the gist of walking through how to create an agent, kind of the foundation of your agent. As you can see, there's a bunch of other settings that we're not going to get into right now as we're already at 30 minutes. So I hope this was helpful and gives you some insight on how agents kind of operate underneath the hood. And we'll get into, further debugging and improving agents down on further videos. But this is just a good little example that should give you a good kickoff, when it comes to deploying your agent and getting it initially set up. Thanks so much for watching.